Have you ever felt that it is quite easy to play video games or scroll through social media, but when it comes to reading a book or watching a series of lectures, it's quite difficult? Is that something that you can relate to? Now, again, I'm talking about the feeling over here. Like you may feel just a few minutes into reading a book that urge to take out your phone and check for your messages or notifications. But when you spend time playing a video game or binge watching Netflix or scrolling through social media, it's very rare that probably you feel the pull to go ahead and take a look at the book that you're reading. Now, also, do you know that if an ordinary person in society, if that particular person loves to do hard things for a prolonged period of time, do you know that society would call that person a genius? Now, this begs the question, is this even possible? In this video, I'm going to discuss something which is probably something that you're not expecting. Many times we think of our goals as what you see over here, as if we are pushing a big rock upwards, right? Now, is there some other factors or some other parameters to this equation of achieving our goals? So let's try to think about that by taking a step backwards. Okay, what if we could make the slope less steeper? Probably in this case, achieving our goals would be even more enjoyable. Now, is this something that is possible? In this video, I'm going to discuss how anyone can make their brain do hard things, and I'm going to discuss how you can sustain this over a long period of time to achieve your wildest goals. Energy and persistence conquer all things. So this is something that Benjamin Franklin said. Now, if your energy and your persistence is not helping you to conquer everything in your life, then I would say that that's because you're tying your own hands. Now, why is that so, or what do I mean with that? Now, hands are something, it's like an analogy of something that God has given us, right? So again, God has given each of us the energy and persistence required to conquer our goals in our life. But if we are not able to use that energy and persistence to achieve our goals, it's because we are tying our hands and ultimately we are not able to channelize our energy and persistence towards what actually matters. Now, why am I saying that we're tying our own hands? For this, let's try to understand something about dopamine and its power. Okay. Now, dopamine in simple terms is a chemical in our brain. It's basically a neurotransmitter, but it's just a chemical in our brain that makes us desire things. Okay. Now, there's a powerful experiment where scientists took some rats and inserted electrodes into their brain, and then whenever rats pulled a lever, they released some dopamine to their brain. Okay, so what happened was the brain of the rats understood that when that lever was pulled, dopamine would be released. So whenever they thought about pulling the lever, dopamine was released in the brain. Notice that it is in anticipation of the reward. And then, of course, when the activity was done, dopamine was released because the scientists had implanted electrodes in their brain. Now, these rats, because they always got a rush of dopamine when they pulled the lever, they stopped doing all other activities. They were no longer interested to eat food or sleep or anything else. And they kept pulling the lever again and again till they dropped from exhaustion. Now, the scientists also did the reverse of the experiment where they stopped the release of dopamine into the rat's brain. Now, the result was that the rats grew so lethargic that they did not even want to go and eat food when food was presented to them. Now, again, notice in this experiment, they saw that when food was put into the rat's mouth, it was still ready to consume it, but the rats were just too lazy to go and take the food when it was kept somewhere nearby. So this experiment demonstrates how powerful dopamine is. Now, we may think that we in our own lives just become hungry and thirsty. We feel those things just because we don't have food or water. But the reality is that dopamine as well plays an important role in such circumstances. We have understood the power of dopamine. Now, if we try to think of dopamine with respect to activities that actually give us some benefit, like reading a book or working on our side projects or going for a run or eating healthy food, the sad fact is that these activities release lower amount of dopamine in our brains. Okay, so that's why probably that it's quite easy for us to go ahead and play video games or scroll through social media, but doing these activities feels very, very difficult. Okay, now if that is the case, is there some way out? What if I told you that this low amount of dopamine released by hard activities is sufficient to generate a huge amount of motivation in us? If this is true, let's also discuss what the problem is, because we many times feel not motivated enough to do hard things. So far, we have seen that activities where dopamine is released in a very low amount and activities in which dopamine is released in a very high amount have different motivation aspects, right? So activities where the dopamine released is very little, which is what we have over here, these activities tend to feel very demotivating, or we have very less motivation to do such activities. But when it comes to activities where a high amount of dopamine is released, we feel motivated to repeat that activity over and over again. So that's what we have learned from the experiment of the rats that we've discussed. Now again, remember, we also discussed that the motivation kicks in even in anticipation of doing the activity. It's not just when the activity is done, it is also in anticipating the activity that we get a rush of dopamine. Now, let's go ahead and try to understand what the problem then is. Because I told you that even the low amount of dopamine that is released in case of hard things can actually lead to high motivation. But if that is not happening, then let's try to understand what the root cause is. Now, in today's modern world, our brains are filled with or pumped with high dopamine activities. Okay, it's flooded with high dopamine. Why is that so? Let's try to understand that. So, another high dopamine releasing activity are activities where a random reward is given. Okay, now for example, in a casino, if you have a slot machine and you keep pulling the slot machine, right, you know that you will not win every time, but you're just saying next time I will win, next time I will win, next time I will win, right? So that is actually an activity that releases one of the highest amounts of dopamine, because it gives you a random reward. You know that the reward will come, but you just don't know when. And that's the same thing when we check our phones. We know that we will eventually get a message or a notification. We just don't know when. So we keep checking our phones again and again. Similarly, when it comes to scrolling through social media, it floods our brains with dopamine because of the novelty, the variety in social media posts, the social validation, because if you post something, you love it when somebody likes it or shares your post, the feeling of belongingness, the information and entertainment that you get through social media posts, and ultimately all of this comes in an unpredictable manner. Like you like some of the posts, but you don't like some of them. So these circumstances have caused a scenario where our brain is today flooded with dopamine. Now you may think, so what? I'm not harming myself. Now let's try to understand whether that is true or not. Now let's talk about something called dopamine tolerance. And for this, let's take an example where a person who's probably not into drinking beer, if that person drinks one beer, that would be sufficient to make that person high. But if this person keeps on drinking beer, then probably the next time this person would need to drink 3 beers to feel that sense of highness. So this is what we call tolerance. Now our brain also, because in today's world we are flooded with dopamine, high dopamine activities, our brain tends to grow dopamine tolerant, and that is the problem because of which we don't feel motivated to do hard things. So this is a huge problem. So the result is that things that don't give us a high amount of dopamine, which is like things that require concentration, reading a book, working on side projects, exercising, eating healthy, these type of things don't give a huge amount of dopamine, and these type of activities don't interest you and they become very difficult to do. We have understood the problem. Now, if this is the case, that because our brain today is flooded with high dopamine activities, and that is leading to a scenario where we don't feel motivation to do hard things, what is the solution to it, or how do we solve this? Let's try to think about that. Now, my wife tells me that many times I am a picky eater. What about you? But is that true if I tell you, you and me, all of us can relate to that instance where we were so hungry and we got some ordinary food and it felt like food from heaven? Can you relate with me in that? Now again, another example would be, think that you got stranded in an island. Now in this island, if you were given just a bowl of rice, okay, you would feel that this is so delicious, right? But probably this same dish, if given to you on a regular day, may not feel that delicious. So over here lies the key in making our brain like to do hard things. So the answer is dopamine detox. Now again, detox is a kind of a misnomer because we are not removing the dopamine from our body, but we are just fasting from high dopamine activities. So that is step number 1. So let's try to see how to start this process of making our brain consistently like to do hard things. So there are 2 aspects to this. So the first aspect is what we've discussed, which is dopamine detox. Now, how do you do that? You take a day of a week, okay? So for me, that's a Sunday. And on that day, don't do social media or avoid binge watching YouTube or Netflix, avoid junk food, and don't check for likes or whatever are those addictive habits, right? So avoid those on that particular day of the week. That is, you're avoiding all high dopamine activities on that particular day. Now, it's up to you whether you want to avoid all of them or at least a few of them once a week. Now, what you're doing over here is that you're actually embracing boredom, right? So whatever gives you high dopamine, which is like addictive and makes you feel that you really like to do it and gives you satisfaction. But again, remember, these things don't tend to give you satisfaction, but these type of activities you're avoiding on that day, and you can fill your day with things like reading a book, reflecting on life, taking a walk, connecting with humans, real humans, right? So in this way, what you're doing is you're embracing boredom, okay? And remember, boredom is your mighty ally in doing hard things. So you're embracing boredom, and in this way, you are resetting your dopamine receptors. Remember that example where we had that person who got high with just 1 beer instead of 3 beers? So resetting your dopamine receptors means that your dopamine receptors become changed in a way that even a little amount of dopamine, when released, it motivates you. And this helps you to like doing less satisfying activities or hard things that typically release only a little amount of dopamine. So boring stuff starts to again become fun, and that's the first step of making your brain like to do hard things, and that'll actually take your productivity level to the next level. Now let's try to understand what the second aspect is. So again, in my life, I was doing this. I was practicing this on Sundays, fasting from high dopamine activities, but still something was missing to reach that next level of productivity. And what I found was that this is a Sunday and I would be doing my dopamine fasting, okay? And then Monday would come. And because I had not checked my phone and things like that on Sunday, or some notifications, things that I would be anticipating or how many views my video got, etc. Right? So because I did not check those things on a Sunday, on Monday, the first thing I would be doing is check my phone and try to cover up messages that I missed, check social media, etc. So this is something that I was doing. And because of this, again, on Monday morning itself, my dopamine receptors started getting tolerant. Now, did you know that a good night's sleep actually helps in resetting your dopamine receptors? That's why you're much more motivated to do hard things first thing in the morning. Okay, so what I did was that I tried to change this. I noticed that when I did not do this, that is, when I did not check my phone for how many subscribers I got, how many views I got, things like that, right? When I avoided these high dopamine activities in the morning, when I did not do this, I noticed that I had much more motivation to do hard things that actually mattered and moved the needle. So the second step of getting your brain to consistently like doing hard things is to avoid high dopamine activities first thing in the morning. So in my case, I decided to avoid such activities till noon. Okay, so I avoided these things till noon, and I noticed that by noon I would have covered a lot of ground and developed a lot of momentum, covered a lot of things that actually mattered, that moved the needle forward, right? And I noticed that when this was the case, afterwards I would allow myself to check notifications, etc. Because of course, in modern life, we need that. But again, I noticed that I would be much less tempted towards those distractions. And when I did try and check those things, I quickly could understand that the activity that I did first thing in the morning, which actually moved the needle, gave me much more real satisfaction. And again, remember, success always breeds success. So in this way, by avoiding high dopamine activities during the first half of the day and solely focusing on things that actually mattered, that actually helped improve my productivity, that actually helped me get stuff done, by doing that, I saw that my productivity increased drastically and I was able to do much more and get much more hard stuff done. So in this video, we have discussed an important puzzle, the puzzle of motivation, or the puzzle of making you like do hard things. So the two steps are: have a dopamine detox day once a week, and then try to avoid high dopamine activities early in the morning. Now, why don't you combine this with the scientific way of discipline or cultivating discipline? So do check out this video where I discuss especially a technique that can help you get 60% more done in terms of whether you're trying to do more practice questions or reading more pages in a book, things like that, right? So check out this video where I discuss techniques that will help you improve your discipline and get 60% more done. And again, that's just not my claims. That's what the research says.